Slavery. It happened over 100 years ago. It was a gruesome time for our ancestors. I know I speak for everyone in this room when I say I'm glad slavery is over. Or is it? Hi, my name is Riley Bland, and my topic is the effects of generational trauma in the Black community. Generational trauma is a deep emotional wound that comes from a toxic environment that affects a whole group of people after being passed down from generation to generation. For example, how many of you in this room got spanked or whooped as a kid? Some of you guys may have even had to go get the belt or the extension cord or the switch that you were going to get hit with. Where do you guys think this form of discipline comes from?
You go to the South and start looking at how children get disciplined. Boy, go fetch me a few switches. I'm going to braid them together. I'm going to soak them in water. I'm going to have you pull your pants down. And I'm going to beat you. Does that sound like something that might have came from somewhere else?
That clip goes to show that physically slavery is over in the Black community, but its effects are still alive today. This is called intergenerational trauma. And this doesn't just affect us because of slavery. It affects us because of the discrimination we face every day, segregation, and more. For the Black community, this can also be known as post-traumatic slave syndrome. This syndrome is very real, and it'll fall into the 3 topics I will be telling you about today. Number 1, mental and physical health. One of the ways intergenerational trauma has affected mental and physical health in the Black community is through vacant esteem. For those of you who don't know, vacant self-esteem means low self-esteem. As we all know, back in the slavery times, Black people were not seen as human beings. We were property, no greater than a bug on the street. Even during segregation, the one thing African Americans were always reminded about was that we were not equals. We were on the bottom and we were worthless. This feeling of hopelessness and depression was carried throughout generations. In the 1940s, a study was done by psychologists Mamie and Kenneth to see the effects segregation had on Black children. In this, they took a white doll and a black doll and asked questions about each doll.
And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because he's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
This goes to show the low self-esteem that was embedded in Black people's minds since we were even young. And how do you think, when those children grew up, how do you think that transpires in future generations? As we know, African Americans all around America go through a racial battle constantly, whether it's fighting stereotypes, discrimination, or blatant racism. But what effects does this have on us African Americans after all this time? Studies imply that racism is associated with higher stress levels than the average person who doesn't really experience it. High levels of stress can lead to hyperextension, or also known as high blood pressure. Funny enough, hyperextension affects the Black community at a higher percentage, more than any other ethnic group. This is not all though. One study in 2010 showed that Black women experience faster aging due to being naturally more stressed than the average person. It is proven that young adults between 18 and 28 who went through racism are more likely to experience psychological distress, to be diagnosed with a mental illness, or to report excessive drug use. Black people struggle with mental health more than we know, and the disadvantages we experience in America and even all over the world play a big role. If drugs don't get you, the mental struggles of being oppressed can. Depression among individuals who have been racially and ethnically minorities in the United States is very different from white Americans. A study was done on a very nationally diverse high school in America, and from it showed that from 1991 to 2017, young African American high schoolers experienced a 73 increase in suicide attempts, while the suicide attempt decreased 9% among white Americans during this time frame. To make matters worse, suicide and death rate among black children ages 5 to 12 is increasingly faster than any other racial or ethnic group in the United States. An example of this is the case of 9-year-old little girl Mackenzie Adams. Mackenzie Adams was being bullied at her school for being friends with a white boy. The entire school was allegedly bullying her, saying things like, "You're ugly, you think you're white because you ride with that white boy, kill yourself," etc. She was later found dead in her home after she committed suicide. Number 2, emotions. Emotions are a strong thing to experience. How you react defines who you are. Emotions play a huge role in that. But what happens when past trauma affects your emotions and how you react to situations? Believe it or not, post-traumatic stress disorder, or better known as PTSD, is another thing passed down from slavery, and is a big factor in emotional intergenerational trauma in the black community. Crazy, right? Now, obviously, we didn't directly inherit PTSD, but we did inherit some of the symptoms and behavior. Dr. Liguori Larry, the author of the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, explains this perfectly. Warning, this video does include mention of sexual assault. Please be mature.
Can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people.
As you all just saw, the video mentioned outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, sleep issues, hypervigilance, and exaggerated startle response. Some of these very well fall into the emotional intergenerational trauma black people face. But most of them fall into this next topic I'm about to tell you about. Number 3, social and cultural. Has grandma or mom ever told you, "I don't want you hanging around those people anymore. I don't trust them." Or, "I don't like that friend of yours. Be careful." This is called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is a mindset that everyone is out to get you. Stuff like this is very common in the black community. And this does fall into the intergenerational trauma in the black community. If you were black, I know for a fact that someone in your family has said something along the lines of, "We must work twice as hard to be just as good as the next person." This is a common teaching in the black community regarding work ethic. This idea is based on the cultural conditioning and the lived experience of our ancestors. This form of trauma is unfortunately part of the toxic superstitions in the black community. The whole drama that black women are supposed to be big, bad, and powerful and not feel any pain is another one. This trope goes way before our time in the 1880s. It was quote-unquote discovered that black women couldn't feel any pain, so they would be experimented on without any anesthesia. I can go on and on about more examples of intergenerational trauma in the black community and more toxic superstitions and teachings in the community and mental health and physical health and all of that. But that would be like a 10-hour presentation. So with that, this concludes my presentation. I hope you guys took everything I said today in. And remember, the only way to heal from trauma is to face it and acknowledge it. I hope you learned something new from my presentation, and with that, enjoy the rest of your day.